The development of Absolum has been a great journey of reinvention for the beat-em-up genre, but also a rare artistic and technical risk nowadays. Guard Crush Games and Dotemu decided it wasn't time to just recover another classic franchise, but to bet on creating an original IP, its own universe where everything started from scratch: lore, art, characters, combat system. Choosing this path shows a spirit of innovation and a desire to mark territory. And it's hard not to admire when studios have the courage to leave the comfortable and venture into the unknown. Bringing Guard Crush after the smashing success of Streets of Rage 4 was key to ensuring Absolum wasn't just another generic beat-em-up. Here, the goal was to mix the fury of classic combat with modern elements, mainly from the roguelite side, with runs, upgrades, and that constant feeling of just one more try. The game went through an initial phase that was even more pulled toward root roguelike, but evolved into something more balanced, seeking accessibility without losing depth. The result is a structure where the player's learning makes as much difference as the upgrades earned in each run, emulating that sense of progression in every match. The collaboration with the Supermonk studio added a spice outside the common visual standard of beat-em-ups. This was Supermonk's first project in games, bringing a whole baggage of animation and comics, noticeable in the artistic style and character movement. For those who pay attention to details, this partnership gave the world of Talam a special charm, something between cartoon and epic medieval, with scenarios that inspire curiosity and characters with striking personality. It's that kind of visual that escapes the obvious, showing that the guys really wanted to create an identity for Absolum that wasn't just arcade nostalgia, but a visual reinvention. The highlight of the development was the effort to make Absolum a game that shines both solo and cooperative, the essence of arcades but with the freedom of today. The team built a combat system that pleasantly mixes the classic with the modern. Each character has distinct abilities and styles, and this reflects in the variable rhythm of the fights. The Coup mode turns into a party, full of chaos where strategies change every second, and improvisation is rewarded. I confess that this focus on multiplayer is, for me, the best heritage of the arcade era, capable of turning any match into memorable stories among friends. Absolum is one of those games that from the first moment already gives a sense of a living and deep universe, something rare in the world of beat-em-ups. The background is built in Talam, a land marked by a cataclysmic event where magic and war walk side by side, and the atmosphere is suffocating due to the tyranny imposed by King Sol Azra, an antagonist who becomes the symbol of fear and oppression. It's interesting how Absolum doesn't limit itself to fighting in the street, but makes a point of immersing the player in a dark fantasy fable with characters who have purposes, losses, and baggage that goes far beyond the cliché. The dramatic core of the game begins when Azra, upon taking possession of the world's magic source, decides to crush all resistance in a bloodbath, persecuting mages and massacring those who dare to challenge his rules. This villain construction isn't just functional, it works because Absolum's world is full of small stories, setting details, and a soundtrack that accentuates the feeling of urgency. Characters like Galandra, a swordswoman driven by revenge, and Carl, the dwarf who fights using rifle and brutality, gain layers as their motivations intertwine with the great plot of the rebellion. The fight for resistance is the guiding thread of Absolum, and here the game differentiates itself by allowing each hero to be guided by mentors and ancestral magical forces, like Uchawi and the Root Sisters. Magic acts as the engine of changes, strengthening not only the protagonist's combat capabilities, but also hope amid chaos. Instead of just advancing stage after stage, Absolum makes the player think about the weight of each decision, whether choosing a path on the permanent map or interacting with secondary characters who can change the fate of this rebellion. Absolum's gameplay is a delicious mix of roguelike, beat-em-up, and RPG that manages to surprise both in variety and refinement of mechanics. Right away, the combat recalls those classic arcade brawlers. But here, everything is taken to a new level thanks to the precision of controls and the amount of possible strategies. Battles are fast-paced and demand total attention, as enemies appear from all sides and each run brings unexpected challenges. In every match, the game randomizes enemies, scenarios, and bosses, so that feeling of routine never hits, which for me is essential for a roguelike to really work. One of the things I enjoyed most is how Absolum mixes quick combos and magical blows, creating sequences that require both timing and creativity. It's not enough to just mash buttons. There are times to use magical counterattacks, take advantage of enemy vulnerability moments, and choose whether to focus on a more aggressive or defensive strategy. The variety of characters adds a lot of flavor to the combat. Each hero has different styles like fast mobility, cider, brute force, Galandra, weight, and resistance, Carl, or badass ranged attacks, Brome. This factor forces you to experiment and discover what fits your style best. Another striking point is that Absolum doesn't hold your hand, like in many new beat-em-ups. You need to learn the hard way to read enemy patterns, discover secret paths, and face varied bosses, each with their tricks. The progression system is deep. With each death, you unlock new abilities and permanent upgrades, which encourages seeking that perfect build that turns your hero into practically a destruction machine. This cycle of dying, learning, and coming back stronger is something that always addicts me in well-made roguelikes, and Absolum delivers it without fluff. Speaking of variety, the stages are packed with secrets, alternative routes, and scenarios that directly influence how you play. There's an exploration element that breaks the focus just on action, so there's that nice feeling of always having something new to find. Interactive objects in the scenarios, mounts, rare items, and hidden foods give that old-school arcade vibe, but without seeming forced or artificial. It's not just going around punching everything. Each obstacle or item is another invitation to think differently. The feeling of playing cooperatively also deserves highlight. Absolum was designed to shine both solo and in pairs. In co-op, there are chained combos, combined elemental powers, and that fine strategy that only works with sync between players. Here, it's not just the number of enemies on screen, but knowing how to create sequences and explore the more advanced mechanics together. It's that kind of game that turns into a party with a friend by your side. I must admit that Absolum has something special that few modern ones can replicate. That constant adrenaline, where any slip can be your end, but the reward for playing well is immense. And all this comes wrapped in impeccable visual clarity, engaging soundtrack, and that dash of nostalgia that hits hard for those who grew up in arcades. It's not just another beat-em-up. It's one of those experiences that hooks you by the challenge, variety, and the desire to be better in each run. It's hard to think of another recent title that ties these genres so well, and Absolum manages to deliver plenty of emotion in every match. Absolum's graphics are really one of the game's highlights, as the hand-drawn art direction establishes a dark fantasy atmosphere full of personality, nuances, and excitement. The visual style is striking both in scenarios and characters, and each one seems to have been carefully crafted with expressive strokes and vibrant animations. The fluidity of movements and the impact of blows convey a sense of weight and emotion rare in beat-em-ups, especially those that try to combine this genre with roguelite elements. The result is a living world, where each combat becomes more immersive precisely because of the visual care that permeates everything. The cartoony visual is clean, allowing everything to stay very clear on screen, and that's more than a technical detail. It's a smart stylistic choice that enhances the gaming experience. Unlike many modern titles that abuse visual effects and filters, Absolum delivers clarity. There's no excessive blurs, particles, or random explosions that confuse the player. The design invests in balance between color and contrast, ensuring that blows, enemies, and scenario elements are easily recognizable and that you never lose sight of the essential in frantic combat. The fact that each scenario seems hand-drawn deepens the sense of adventure and gives a sense of authenticity even in Talam's most fantastic areas. The textures of the environments convey both robustness and magic, and the bosses are visually distinct and eye-catching. Absolum doesn't try to be hyper-realistic. It bets on an expressive style, with scenarios that blend medieval setting and RPG traits, bringing memories of classics like Golden Axe and Dungeons and Dragons. This makes the player feel like exploring a unique universe, far from the generic. In the animations part, there's a clear effort from production to deliver dynamic events, special blows, and magics that impact visually. Each character has their own gestures, with detailed body action and light effects that highlight magics or more devastating attacks. The bosses are another spectacle apart. Besides design creativity, they emerge imposing on the battlefield, using differentiated animations, wide attacks, and well-dosed particles that value each confrontation. This care transforms battles that could be common into memorable events, visually rewarding. The game also invests heavily in variety. The choice of characters not only changes gameplay but brings totally distinct visual nuances and animations, expanding the range of possibilities for those who like to experiment. There are effects that change according to builds and unlocked abilities, offering replay value not just in gameplay but also aesthetically. These are small details, like the shine of weapons, changes in the scenario after magics, or textures that change according to time and player progress, that reveal the developer's passion for the visual. Absolum has a technical performance that impressed me a lot in the demo, especially considering it's a game with such detailed visuals and fluid animations. I played on a mid-range PC with an old i5 processor and 8 gigs of RAM, and the game ran smooth most of the time, keeping a constant 60 FPS during intense fights, which is crucial for a genre where every blow needs to be precise. The graphics, with that hand-drawn animation style that recalls high-quality productions, don't weigh as much as I expected. The engine seems optimized not to sacrifice responsiveness, even with enemies jumping all over the screen and particle effects flying everywhere. Personally, I think this is a huge relief for those who, like me, love classic beat-em-ups but hate when the frame rate drops and turns combat into a slow mess. Here, every punch and dodge flows as if it were a natural extension of my commands, making me feel in total control, without irritating lags that break the rhythm. Of course, in moments of enemy crowds, I noticed a slight drop to 50 FPS, but nothing that compromised the fun. I updated the video card drivers and lowered the shadows to medium, and done. Problem solved. Which shows that the game is accessible for non-top-of-the-line hardware. Speaking more about stability, the Absolum demo behaved exemplarily in most of my sessions, without random crashes or freezes that I fear so much in games in development. I ran several runs in a row, switching between characters and exploring branched paths, and the game maintained consistent performance with quick loadings between sections, like less than 10 seconds to load a new level, which is great for a roguelite where you die and restart all the time. The audio also contributes to this sense of fluidity. The impact sound effects and the medieval soundtrack with heavy metal touches sync perfectly with the actions, without delays or pops that I've seen reports of in forums, probably because I adjusted the audio buffer in the settings. In my personal opinion, this elevates the game to a level above the retro beat-em-ups I love, like Streets of Rage 4, because here the performance isn't just functional. It enhances the percussive impact of each blow, making me feel like I'm in the middle of an epic battle without technical interruptions. I had a crash once when alt-tabbing during an animation, but I verified the files on Steam and it never happened again. It's one of those details that show the development team is attentive, and I appreciate that, because nothing kills hype more than instability in a game that promises infinite replayability. In terms of graphical optimization, Absolum shines with options that allow customizing the experience without sacrificing visual beauty, which is something I value a lot as a fan of games with stylized art. In the demo, I set it to 1080p resolutions and disabled super sampling, and the game kept sharp textures and smooth animations with characters that pop on screen vibrantly, without blurs or artifacts. The fantasy environments, full of details like dark mines and dense forests, run without hitches, and the light and shadow effects add depth without overloading the hardware. I tested on a weaker laptop and still got 45-50 FPS on medium settings, which is impressive for a title that mixes elements of Hades with beat-em-ups. I think this makes Absolum accessible to folks who don't have expensive gaming PCs, something that excites me because I myself started playing on modest machines in the 90s. It's like the game says, come enjoy without technical worries, and that makes me want to dive deeper into the runs, knowing the performance won't betray me in the middle of an intense boss fight. As for control responsiveness, Absolum delivers performance that borders on perfection, especially with a controller, where every input is registered instantly, without input lag that I've noticed in other games of the genre. I used a DualSense and a generic controller, and in both cases, the dodges and heavy attacks responded as if they were extensions of my fingers, with invincibility frames that feel precise and fair. In the demo, even in scenarios crowded with enemies with overlapping hitboxes, the game calculates collisions efficiently, avoiding frame rate drops and keeping everything legible on screen. No chaotic button mashing, it's all calculated and fluid. My view is that this is what separates a good beat-em-up from a great one. The technical performance that makes you feel powerful, not frustrated. I found myself repeating sections just to enjoy how enemies bounce off the screen edges without lag, and that reminds me why I love this style of game. It's almost therapeutic, beating hordes without the system freezing or losing sync, and Absolum nails it. Exploring the performance side in long runs, Absolum stands out for its stability over time, without excessive heating or FPS degradation after hours of play, which is rare in demos of ambitious games like this. I did repeated playthroughs with friends in local co-op, and the game handled multiple players well, keeping 60 FPS stable even with more actions on screen, like allied mercenaries and activated environmental traps. The roguelite upgrades, which add status effects, don't negatively impact performance. On the contrary, they integrate smoothly with particles and animations that run without hiccups. From my point of view, this is genius because I hate when games with progression mechanics sacrifice fluidity for complexity. Here it's the opposite, and it makes me imagine how it'll be in the full release, with more content, without the hardware suffering. It's personal for me because as someone who grew up with arcades where every frame counted, seeing a modern game respect that gives me good nostalgia, mixed with excitement for the future. Considering the potential for the final launch, Absolum's performance in the demo suggests the game will be a monster in terms of optimization, especially for consoles like PS5, where I imagine it'll run in 4K without effort based on the modest PC requirements. I tested on recommended settings and noticed the game uses resources well, with spatial audio that doesn't drain CPU and visuals that scale beautifully. There are reports of small issues like input lag in controllers, but connecting after launch solved it for me. And that reinforces my opinion that the team is polishing everything for an impeccable experience. Personally, I'm anxious to see how this evolves, because if the demo already delivers performance that makes me forget technical limitations and just focus on the fun of beating fantasy monsters, the full game will be one of those I play for hours without stopping, feeling each blow as if it were real. That's what makes a beat-em-up unforgettable. The decision to buy at launch or wait depends a lot on your level of excitement, with modern beat-em-ups mixed with roguelite elements. If you're a fan of games like Streets of Rage 4 or TMNT Shredder's Revenge, from the same publisher Dotemu, the launch might be worth it for the novelty and initial hype, especially with local and online co-op for 2 players that promises immediate fun. However, as it's a new title with innovative mechanics like meta progression and customizable builds, there's the risk of initial patches for balancing or fixes, something common in roguelites. Personally, I'd buy on day one for the fluid combat and impressive art. Waiting for the game can be a good strategy if you want to see how the community reacts, especially in terms of longevity and replayability, since Absolum focuses on branched paths, varied missions, and challenging bosses in a fantasy world inspired by classics like Golden Axe. The game is polished, with high-quality animations from the Supermonk studio and soundtrack by renowned composers like Gareth Coker and Mick Gordon, which suggests a solid launch without major issues. On the other hand, buying at launch guarantees access to any pre-order bonuses or initial updates, and as the game is an original IP from Dotemu, supporting early can encourage more content. In my view, if your budget allows, go for the launch to capture that fresh feeling of discovery. The title also fits well for players who appreciate impactful visuals and epic soundtracks, with 4 playable characters, like the swordswoman Galandra or the tank dwarf Carl, each with unique abilities that encourage experimentation. It's recommended for enthusiasts of dark fantasy and strategic combats, where magical buffs and interactions with the scenario elevate the challenge. If you're new to the genre, it can be an accessible entry point, but prepare for the learning curve in solo or co-op modes. Personally, I'd recommend it to those who, like me, love creative mixes that revive the arcade spirit with current innovations. Absolum seems like a gem for those who, like me, grew up with retro beat-em-ups and crave something fresh. I'd buy at launch because Dotemu's track record gives me confidence, and the co-op would make me play hours with friends, reliving that arcade nostalgia. The risk of waiting is missing the initial buzz, but if the game delivers on the promised replayability, it'll be worth every penny right away.